My mother was 63 years old, and she was on her knees, not praying, not resting, on the driveway of one of the biggest houses in Lekki. Her uniform was clean, neatly pressed, because that's the kind of woman she is. Even in hardship, she carries dignity. But the woman standing over her? She didn't see dignity. She saw someone she could control. She laughed and pressed her expensive heel against my mother's shoulder. "Wipe it," she said. "Now." My mother didn't move. And the worst part? They all watched. No one said a word. They thought she was just a maid. Just another invisible woman. What they didn't know was that the woman on her knees was my mother. And the man they once called a nobody, the man she walked away from, that man was me. And at that very moment, I was already in a helicopter, flying straight to that house. They had no idea what was coming. Before we go into the full story, drop in the comments right now, where in the world are you watching from? And hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story is one you absolutely cannot afford to miss. The sun in Enugu rose differently than it did in Lagos. I know this because I spent the first 22 years of my life watching it come up over the red earth hills behind our compound, slow and patient, like it had nowhere particular to be. Lagos sun hits you like an announcement, sudden, declarative, already speaking before you have had time to wake. Enugu sun arrives like a quiet uncle who has been walking since before dawn just to sit with you. It gives you a moment. It gives you a breath. We needed that breath in our house most mornings. My father, Emeka Sr., was a schoolteacher in the old way, the way that means he owned 3 good shirts and a bicycle and more dignity than most people ever accumulate, and that was enough. And then one day it wasn't enough because he was gone, and what was enough had to be reassessed. I was 7 years old. My sister Chisholm was 5. My mother was 34, and she stood in the compound the morning after the burial and looked at the garden my father had kept, his tomatoes, his small line of peppers, the pawpaw tree he had planted the year I was born, and I watched her make a decision. I could not have named it then. I was 7. But I have thought about that moment many times since, and what I saw in her face was not grief falling apart. It was grief being folded, carefully, like a good cloth, and put in a place where it would not be in the way of what needed doing. She went to work the following Monday. She worked in other people's homes. She cleaned and cooked and ironed and minded children, and did it all with the particular combination of competence and dignity that became, over the years, her signature. She was known in the neighborhood as someone whose work you could trust, not just functionally, but morally. Things did not go missing. Arrangements were kept. If she said she would be there at 7, she was there at 6:45 because 7 was what she had promised, and being early was the respect she showed the promise. Some of the women she worked for treated her like a person. Some treated her like a very reliable piece of equipment. She received both with the same steady courtesy, and when she came home in the evenings she left the second type at the gate. She would not bring that into the house, she said, because a house was for real things. What she brought home was conversation. Every evening, after she had changed out of her work dress and washed her face and put a pot on and settled on the low stool outside our door with her cup of Bernvita, she would talk about what she had heard, about something in the newspaper one of the households received, about a book she had found and read during her lunch break. She was a remarkable reader, my mother, picking through anything she could find, reference books and novels and instruction manuals with the same focused curiosity. About ideas. She never spoke about the difficult parts of her days. Not to us. We learned this later, from things she said after we were grown. She said she did not want us carrying the weight of her daily humiliations on our young backs, because children's backs were for growing tall on, not for carrying adult sorrows. Instead, she asked us questions. What did you learn today? Not in school, she was specific about this. What did you learn today? It could be from anywhere. A conversation. Something you noticed. The way light moved through a particular window. She wanted us learning to notice the world, and she made noticing feel like a valuable act rather than an accidental one. When I was 12, a boy in my class laughed at my shoes in front of the whole class. They were the same shoes I had been wearing for 2 years, brown, sturdy, beginning to separate at the left sole in a way my mother had repaired twice with strong glue. He pointed at them and said something that I will not repeat here because it does not deserve to travel further than it already has. I came home crying. My mother did not immediately comfort me in the way I wanted. She did not dismiss the boy or minimize the pain or tell me it did not matter. She sat me down and looked at me steadily until the worst of the crying had passed. Then she said, "Those people who look down at you from their high place, they are standing on something. The question you need to ask is what they are standing on theirs? Did they build it? Or did somebody build it for them while they were busy laughing?
She paused.
Build your own thing, Emeka. Build something that belongs to you in a way that no one gave it to you and no one can take it. Then nobody can take the ground from under you. You understand. I did not entirely understand at 12, but I did not forget it either. It lodged somewhere specific, in the part of the brain that stores things you are not yet ready to use but know you will need. I finished secondary school. I won a federal government scholarship. My mother's face when the letter came was the face of a person seeing something they had planted finally break through the soil. I went to the University of Nigeria in Nsukka to study computer science because I had decided at 17 that the future was going to be built in code, and I was going to be one of the builders. For years later, I came home with a degree and 45,000 naira in an envelope my mother had pressed into my hands at the bus terminal. Where did you get this? I asked her. I saved it, she said simply. Mama, this is… Go, she said. Lagos is waiting. Don't make it wait too long. I cried in the bus. I am not ashamed of that. I pressed my face against the window and watched Enugu disappear behind me, and I held the envelope in both hands, and I cried quietly for about 40 minutes until the landscape changed, and I could not tell anymore which direction home was. Then I dried my face and started thinking about what I was going to do. Lagos does not care about your feelings. This is not a criticism. It is simply a fact about the city's character, the way you might say that the Atlantic Ocean does not care about your swimming schedule. Lagos is what it is, loud, fast, layered, constantly generating and consuming its own human drama, and if you arrive there expecting it to make room for you, you'll be waiting on the wrong side of every door. What Lagos will do, if you pay very close attention, is show you exactly where the gaps are. The gaps are where the money is. The gaps between what exists and what should exist. The gaps between what is promised and what is delivered. The gaps between what people say they can do and what they are actually doing. Every great Lagos success story, the genuine ones, not the performed ones, is a story about someone who found a gap and had the nerve and the patience and the stubbornness to fill it. I found my gap in Alaba International Market, but I am getting ahead of myself. My first 3 years in Lagos, a room in Bariga shared with a cousin of a friend of a contact who had given me the number. The room had a single window, a bed, a small shelf, and a kerosene lamp for when NEPA took the light, which was frequently. My salary from the software firm in Acadia covered the rent, the transport, and about 4.5 days of food per week. The remaining days I managed on ingenuity, market stalls, chin-chin from street vendors, the occasional generous office celebration where the food was free if you arrived early. I did not complain about this. There was nobody relevant to complain to, and complaining takes energy that I was using for other things. What I did in those early years, in the evenings after work, on weekends, during the 12 minutes here and 18 minutes there that accumulated over time into something meaningful, was observe. I walked through markets. I talked to small business owners. I sat in the back of distribution trucks when they would let me and asked drivers about their routes and their problems. I attended any free industry event I could find, trade association meetings, chamber of commerce breakfasts where they didn't check too carefully who had paid to be there, university seminars open to the public. I was assembling a picture. The picture was of a Nigerian commercial ecosystem that was fundamentally held together with twine and prayer. Goods would leave a factory in ABA, pass through 3 distributors, travel in 3 different vehicles, change hands based on phone calls that could not be verified, arrive at a retail point with paperwork that did not match what was in the crates, get disputed, generate bad debt, cause the manufacturer to tighten credit, which caused the next distributor to squeeze margins, which caused the retailer to raise prices, which caused the consumer to buy less, and everyone along the chain wondered why business was hard. The answer was not capacity. The answer was not demand. The answer was information. Nobody along the chain had accurate, real-time information about where anything was and who had done what with it. I started building the solution. Not immediately. First, I had to understand the problem deeply enough to see which solution would actually fit. I spent 8 months doing nothing but mapping the problem, drawing diagrams in cheap notebooks, interviewing everyone I could find who moved goods for a living, reading everything available about supply chain software and adaptation for low infrastructure contexts. Then I started building. I built TrackChain, a platform for small and medium manufacturers and their distributors to share supply chain visibility in real time, with tools simple enough to work on the kind of smartphones that actual market people owned, not the kind featured in Lagos tech presentations. I built it to work on slow connections. I built it to work partly offline. I built it in English and Pidgin and included voice notes as a data entry option because not everyone reads well, and that is not a flaw, it is simply a fact that a useful product must accommodate. I built it in the evenings and on weekends for 18 months while working my day job. I ran 2 beta tests that mostly failed, which taught me more than success would have. I rewrote core sections 4 times. And somewhere in the middle of all this, on a Tuesday afternoon in Victoria Island at a co-working space I had started using because it had reliable internet and air conditioning, I met Adiz Okonkwo-Briggs. She walked into the co-working space like a woman who had made a decision about herself and expected the room to confirm it. Tall, put together in a very specific way, the kind of put together that is both natural and also practiced, both effortless and also the result of many considered choices, carrying a MacBook under her arm and the particular confidence of someone who knows where she is going and why. She was a marketing consultant. She had clients in FMCG, in tech, in real estate. She was good at her work, genuinely good, I would learn. She had a precision of thought that I admired, and a way of cutting through the noise of a problem to find what was actually happening underneath it. When she turned that skill on business problems, it was impressive. The problem, as I would also learn, was where she turned it when she was not working. That first day, she borrowed my charger because hers was in her car, and her car was in traffic on Ozumbambadu, and she had a call in 7 minutes. I handed it over. We introduced ourselves. She asked what I was building. I told her. She asked 3 very specific questions that indicated she had actually understood what I said, which at that stage of development was not a thing many people did. I liked her immediately. We talked for 40 minutes that day and exchanged numbers in the casual way of Lagos professionals who collect contacts with the same ease and the same tentative sincerity. She called 3 days later, ostensibly about a marketing question for TrackChain that turned into dinner. We dated for 2 years. The first year was honest.
I want to be clear about that.
Whatever followed, the first year was real. The kind of realness that 2 people who are genuinely interested in each other generate almost involuntarily, the kind that doesn't require management or maintenance, it just exists. We argued about ideas. We argued about the best way to eat siya. We drove to Ape on a Saturday morning and she complained about the road, and I agreed with her about the road, and we ate fresh fish by the lagoon, and she told me about her childhood in Akka, her father the banker, her mother the teacher, her own story that was in many ways the opposite of mine, and in the important ways very similar. I told her about TrackChain, about the 18 months of evening builds, about the 2 failed betas. She listened carefully. She made suggestions that were sometimes better than the things I had planned. She had that kind of mind. I did not tell her, yet, the scale of what I was beginning to think this could become. Not because I was hiding it, because I was not sure yet myself, and I was a person who did not speak about things until he was sure. The second year was different. The shift did not happen like a door closing. It happened like paint peeling, barely visible at first. Then one day you notice a whole section has come away. I have thought about this many times since, trying to identify the exact first sign, and I think it was the evening in April when she came to my apartment for dinner, looked at the spare room I was using as an office and said, "You need to get out of Grace Emeka. Seriously. You need to be where things are happening." The tone was not unkind. It was the tone of someone giving useful advice to a project that was underperforming. That was the first time I understood that she had categories for places, for lifestyles, for salaries, for ambitions, and she was performing a regular check on whether I was moving through those categories at a satisfying pace. I was not. By her measurement, I was building something that had not yet become visible. I was in the part of building where the foundation is still underground and what you are doing looks, from the outside, very much like standing in a field with tools. She could not see what I could see. I do not blame her entirely for this. Not everyone can see underground work. Not everyone has been trained to look for foundation before they look for height. What I blame her for, gently, without bitterness, because bitterness is a very expensive emotion and I have learned to spend carefully, is what she chose to do with what she could not see. She started measuring her friends' boyfriends and where they lived, her colleagues and what they drove, the women from her university days and what their husbands provided. She had always been socially aware in this way. It was one of the things her professional sharpness was partly built from, a sensitivity to where things were positioned in a hierarchy. But in the second year of us, that sensitivity turned from professional skill into personal accounting, and I was the ledger. I watched it happen. I did not confront it directly because I believed, foolishly, generously, I am not sure which, that when TrackChain became what I knew it was going to become, the accounting would correct itself. What I underestimated was how much she had already decided about me by then. How thoroughly she had categorized me. In her system, I was a good man who would probably always be a good man, and probably always work in the middle-level way of good men who do not quite make it, and the kindest thing she could do for herself was accept this and move on before too much of her prime years were spent. She broke up with me on a Thursday evening in October. She had prepared for it. The gathering of her small belongings from around my apartment had the efficiency of someone who had done it in their head several times already. Each item retrieved and placed in her bag with a kind of preemptive tidiness that, in another context, I would have admired. I need someone established, she said. Someone who can give me the life I deserve. You're brilliant, Emeka. But brilliant doesn't pay school fees. Brilliant doesn't take you to Dubai in business class. I've been patient. I've tried to see the vision. But I'm 30 years old, and I can't keep waiting for something that might not come. I asked her. And if it comes? She had the decency to look uncomfortable for exactly 1 second. Then she picked up her bag. It's not about the money, she said. It's about the life. The kind of life I've worked hard for. I deserve to be with someone who is already there. She left at 8:47 in the evening. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock on the wall, the simple wall clock with the wooden frame that my mother had sent me in a package 2 years earlier, and I noted the time with the same mechanical precision I used for everything without knowing why, just filing the information. I sat on my couch for a long time, not in pieces. I want to be accurate about this. I was hurting. I would be lying if I said otherwise because 2 years is not a small thing and she was not a small person in my life, but the hurt was clean, the way a cut is clean. It was not the confusion of betrayal. It was the pain of loss, which is a different thing and survivable. What stayed with me, after the hurt, was a clarity. She had told me who she was. She had told me clearly, with no ambiguity, in the plainest available language, exactly what she valued and how she valued it. And she had been telling me for a year before she finally said it out loud. I had just not let myself hear it. I called my mother. Mama. My son. What happened? She always knew. She had a specific sense for the quality of my voice that functioned like a diagnostic instrument. I told her. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a silence, the particular kind my mother used the way other people use words, to let something settle. Then she said, "Build your own thing, my son. Then nobody can take the ground from under you." It was the same sentence from when I was 12. I think she knew it was. I went back to work. If you want to understand what I built and why the building mattered, you need to understand what the Nigerian supply chain problem actually costs. Not in abstract terms. In the specific terms of specific people. The woman in Kano making groundnut oil in a cooperative with 14 other women. She makes an excellent product. She has been making it for 22 years. She has relationships with 3 distributors who move her product to retailers across 3 states. But she has no visibility into what happens after it leaves her gate. She invoices, she waits, she calls, she is told the goods haven't sold yet, she is told the payment is coming, she is told there was a problem at the market, and she cannot verify any of it because the information lives in other people's phones and memories, and she has no access to it. So she finances distribution out of her own pocket, extending credit she cannot quite afford, because if she demands payment up front, the distributors will go to her competitor, who is also extending credit she cannot afford. The whole system runs on mutual precarity. She cannot grow. She cannot invest in equipment. She cannot take the risk of expanding to a new state because she is already stretched thin managing the uncertainty of the 3 she is in. Multiply this woman by approximately 400,000 small and medium manufacturers across Nigeria. you begin to see the scale of what was being lost. TrackChain did one thing. It put all parties on the same information system in real time. The manufacturer could see when her goods were collected, when they arrived, when they were placed on shelves, when they were sold. The distributor could generate automated proof of delivery. The retailer could order digitally with a paper trail. Disputes, which previously had to be resolved through phone calls and grudges and occasionally lawyers, dissolved because the information was shared and verifiable. The beta tests had failed not because the idea was wrong, but because the implementation had been too complex. I had designed it like an engineer. I needed to redesign it like someone who had spent time watching a market woman use her phone. The second redesign, the one I completed in the 14 months after Dees left, was the version that worked. In the month after I finished it, I had 4 serious conversations with manufacturers and distributors who had heard about the new beta. In the 3 months after that, 14 of them signed up. Then, quietly, 3 months after that, I received an inquiry from a mid-sized FMCG distribution company in Port Harcourt. They had been recommended by 2 separate contacts. They had looked at the platform. They wanted to meet. I drove to Port Harcourt on a Thursday. We met in a conference room in their office on ABA Road. The MD was a woman named Mrs. Okafor, about 55, with reading glasses on a chain and the particular brand of sharp attention that very experienced businesspeople develop. She was listening not just to what I was saying but to the shape of how I said it, checking for the kinds of inconsistency that indicate someone who does not fully understand their own product. She found none. The contract was for 8 million naira annually. I read the signed copy on the drive back to Lagos, the bus moving through the thick night of the Beninor Road, my phone screen the only light. I read it 3 times. Then I sat back and looked at the dark bush passing outside the window, and I allowed myself, for approximately 2 minutes, to understand what had just happened. Then I called Chitty. "Start the company properly," he said immediately. He had been saying this for a year. "Incorporation, proper structure, a board, everything. You're past the point where you can keep this informal." "I know," I said. "And, Emeka, don't tell anyone yet. Not until the structure is right." "I know," I said. Graceland Holdings was incorporated 4 weeks later. Named for my mother. Grace, her name. Land, what she had always told me to build on, your own ground, the kind that belongs to you. I registered it on a Wednesday morning with Chitty beside me, in the offices of a firm in Victoria Island that handled corporate registrations. I signed the papers in the same way I signed everything, carefully, with a full understanding of what each line meant. The registered address was a small office I had taken in Lekki Phase 2. 4 desks. A meeting table that was actually a dining table I had bought from a furniture market in Surulere and carried in a kiki with the leg over my shoulder. A printer. A coffee machine that required patient management. I hired 2 people the first week. Sohn Adesanya, 24, freshly graduated from Covenant University, with a computer science degree and a particular talent for database architecture that I had tested thoroughly before offering the role. And a young woman named Funk who had been working in a logistics company in Apapa and knew the practical mechanics of goods movement in a way that no textbook had taught her. I paid them well. Not extravagantly, we were not yet extravagant, but well. Well enough that they did not have to do calculations in their heads when the month ended about whether they could afford to eat properly. I had done those calculations for too many years to be comfortable making someone else do them. In the 18 months that followed, Graceland grew in the way that things that solve real problems grow, steadily, urgently, with the self-reinforcing momentum that comes when enough people tell enough other people that something actually works. By month 18, we had 31 paying clients. A team of 14. A monthly recurring revenue that required me to open a business account because my existing one was producing monthly statements that looked, to put it plainly, like someone else's. I did not move apartments. This is important. I did not buy a new car. I did not acquire any of the external signals of success that Lagos watches for and rewards. I told no one outside my inner circle, Chitty, Funk, Sohn, my sister Chisholm, the real numbers. My grandmother used to say, "The yam does not announce itself before it is stored." She meant you should not show your progress before it is secure. I had taken this seriously my entire life, and I was not about to stop now. My mother had moved to Lagos by then. The year before, I had quietly paid off the house in Enugu, not told her I was doing it, just called the landlord, got the figure, transferred the funds, and I sent her a small amount each month that I told her was savings help. She accepted it the way she accepted most of my help, with a look that said she knew exactly what it was and a decision not to make a production of it. She told me she was restless. That stillness made her bones ache. That she had found work with a family in Lekki through a church connection, a decent family, she said, good people. What is the area? I asked her. Lekki Phase 1, she said. Nice estate. Security gate, the works. And the family? Okonkwo Briggs. Old Lagos family. The patriarch, chief, he is a serious man. A good man, I think.
She paused.
There is a new girlfriend. The son brought her. She has only been there 3 months. Something moved through me like a small cold wave. I pressed it down. What's the girlfriend like? I asked carefully. My mother was quiet for a moment. A bit proud, she said, with a careful neutrality that in my mother's vocabulary meant considerably more than it appeared. What is her name? I asked. Adiz, she said. A longer silence this time. Both of ours. Common name, I said. Very common, my mother agreed. We changed the subject. We did not return to it for 2 months. The call came at 11 o'clock on a Monday night. My mother did not make unnecessary late-night calls. She was in bed by 9:30, and she guarded her sleep the way some people guard their reputations. When I saw her name on my screen at 11 o'clock at night, I answered on the first ring. Mama. Emeka. I need to tell you something. Her voice was the deliberate calm of someone who has been carrying a weight for weeks and has finally decided to set it down somewhere, carefully, so it doesn't break anything when it lands. Tell me, I said. She talked for 37 minutes. I know because when she finished I looked at the call timer. She told me how the trouble had started, gradually, in the way that cruelty always starts gradually when the person delivering it is intelligent enough to understand that sudden cruelty creates witnesses and records. Small reductions. A sharper tone here. A dismissive gesture there. The particular technique of humiliation that works by slow accumulation, so that at any given moment each individual incident seems too minor to report, too ambiguous to name, and the full weight of it only becomes visible in the total. She told me about the day Adiz had accused her of stealing a bottle of olive oil. Made the accusation in front of the other household staff, the gateman, the young girl who did the laundry, the garden boy, in a tone that made clear she was not genuinely investigating a theft, but using the accusation as an instrument. My mother had stood in the kitchen doorway for a full minute, unable to speak, not from shame. She had not stolen anything and she knew it, and everyone in the room knew it, but from the pure physical shock of being treated as something less than a person in front of witnesses who needed their jobs too much to say anything. She told me about the lunch party. 8 of Adiz's friends, the kind of Lagos women who have cultivated an aesthetic of effortless superiority and deploy it like a second language, arranged on the sofas and terraced chairs while Adiz made my mother mop the sitting room floor 3 times. The 3rd time with specific direction about technique, delivered in the voice of a person demonstrating something unfortunate but necessary for the edification of her guests. 2 of the guests had looked at the floor and then at each other. 1 had looked at her phone. None had said anything. She told me about the ironing. The shirt dropped deliberately to the floor. Do it again. And this time like you actually care. She told me about the day Adiz had called her, these people, to a visiting friend, gesturing in her direction while discussing the general category of domestic workers with the distant anthropological interest of someone observing an unfamiliar animal. I listened to every word. I sat on the edge of my bed in my apartment in Bogota, the same apartment I had been living in for 6 years, the same apartment I had not moved out of despite having the means to several times over, because the apartment was not the point, and I listened to my 63-year-old mother describe what it had been like to go to work every day for 3 months in a house where she was made to feel subhuman. My hands were quiet. My face was quiet. Inside something was very loud. When she finished, I said, "Mama, why didn't you tell me sooner?" A pause. "Because I wanted to see if she would turn," my mother said. "Turn how?" "Some people who behave badly, they are performing. They are frightened, and the cruelty is a performance of power because they don't feel powerful somewhere else. Those people can turn if something changes,
If they're shown a different way.
if someone treats them with real dignity instead of feeding the performance. She paused again. I was watching to see which kind she was. And she is not the performing kind, my mother said quietly. This is who she actually believes herself to be. A person to whom other people, certain other people, are simply not fully real. Mama, give your notice in the morning. I already drafted it, she said, with the smallest note of something that in another person might have been amusement. 30 days. Proper.
Good.
And Mama, I stopped. What, my son? I need you to stay until the notice period ends. I need you to be there one more time.
Can you do that?
Silence. Then, what are you planning, Emeka? Nothing dramatic, I said, which was true, in the way that technically accurate statements can be true while being significantly incomplete. Emeka Jr. Mama. I know that voice. That is your planning voice. You have had that voice since you were 9 years old, and you reorganized the compound without telling anyone. I said nothing. She sighed. I will stay, she said. But whatever you're planning, make sure it is worth something real, not just worth the satisfaction of it. I didn't raise you to perform victory, my son. I raised you to know the difference. I know the difference, I said. I believe you, she said. Good night. After I hung up, I called Chitty. There's a board presentation I've been avoiding, I said when he answered. I know, Chitty said. He always knew. The Transcorp partnership. Emeka, they are ready to finalize. They have been ready for 2 months. You keep finding reasons to delay. The timing wasn't right, I said. And now it is? Schedule the helicopter for 3 weeks from Friday, I said. I'm coming in from Abuja after the federal ministry briefing. I want to land directly at the investment meeting. And where is the meeting? I told him. A long silence. Emeka, Chitty said carefully. Chief Okonkwo Briggs is a potential anchor investor. His estate is in Lekki Phase 1. I know. His son's girlfriend is. I know. The same woman who, Chitty, book the pad. The longest silence. I will book the pad, he said. But Emeka, I need you to tell me that this is about the business and not about making a point. I thought about my mother's hands pressed against the driveway. I thought about a shirt dropped to the floor. I thought about the specific, practiced nature of cruelty delivered to someone who cannot fight back. It is about the business, I said. It is entirely about the business. It is also about making a point. Both of these things are true, and they are not in conflict. Chitty was quiet for a moment. Book the pad, he said, to himself as much as to me.
Fine.
I'll book the pad. On the morning my mother gave her notice, Adiz was on a call in the study. She looked up when my mother appeared in the doorway, read the formal letter in my mother's hand, and held out her palm without interrupting her conversation. She took the letter, glanced at it, and made a small sound, somewhere between acknowledgement and dismissal, and returned to her call. When she got off the phone, she said, Fine. I was going to suggest you move on anyway. You people get too comfortable. My mother thanked her for the employment. She was specific and sincere about it. Then she went back to her work. In the weeks between the notice and the day, my mother told me later, Adiz's treatment of her went through an interesting evolution. For the first week it was cold indifference, the particular indifference of someone who has decided you no longer exist in any meaningful sense. In the second week there were 2 incidents that I will describe simply as further confirmation of what my mother had already determined about her. In the third week, with 3 days remaining in the notice period, something shifted in Adiz that my mother described as a kind of restlessness, as if she could sense that something was approaching without being able to name what it was. On the final day, my mother ironed every shirt in the laundry, cleaned the kitchen until it was as clean as a kitchen can be made, scrubbed the back garden tiles on her hands and knees, and prepared a light pepper soup that she left covered on the stove with a note about the portions. She was doing this last task, replacing the pot lid, when she heard the first thing. Adiz was in the driveway with Remy, her closest friend, a woman who had attended enough of these afternoons to have developed a practiced expression of polite interest in whatever Adiz was saying. The door between the kitchen and the service entrance was open. Lagos afternoon air carries voices. The old woman is finally leaving today, Adiz was saying. Thank God. She was starting to get on my nerves. These Enugu women, they suffer their whole lives, and then they think that gives them some kind of permission to look at you a certain way. As if. Remy made a sound of commiseration. She has this whole quiet dignity thing she does. It used to irritate me so much. Like she's passing judgment without saying anything. I made her remop the living room 3 times one afternoon, just to disrupt it. She laughed. You should have seen her face. My mother set down the pot lid carefully. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the clean counter, the clean stove, the covered pot of pepper soup. Then she heard the helicopter. It started at the edge of hearing, a distant rhythm, low and growing, the specific sound that in Lekki phase 1 usually means either a government official or a very serious private party is in the vicinity. The sound grew quickly, grew past quick into present, into here, into overhead, the unmistakable percussive assertion of an Augusta Westland helicopter making a direct and confident approach to the landing pad at the back of the Okonkwo Briggs estate. My mother walked to the side entrance of the house. She stood in the doorway and watched the helicopter descend. It was the matte gray aircraft with the gold G on its side that I had described to her 3 weeks earlier. She watched it settle. She watched the blade slow. She straightened her uniform, tucked in the collar, smoothed the front, with the practiced efficiency of someone who has always presented themselves correctly regardless of the circumstances. She was ready. In the driveway, Adiz had gone quiet. She was shielding her eyes with her hand, the way people do when they are trying to see something that hasn't quite resolved yet into a shape they recognize. Remy was doing the same. The helicopter's logo was visible from 50 meters. The G was large, deliberate, the kind of branding that says we are not hiding from anyone. Whose is that? Remy asked. Must be Daddy's business people, Adiz said. But her voice had a quality it did not usually have, a tentativeness, like someone sight-reading an unfamiliar piece of music. Chief Okonkwo Briggs emerged from the main house walking with the particular unhurried authority of a man at home on his own property and comfortable with what was arriving on it. He was wearing his good Igbada, the deep burgundy one with the embroidery, the one my mother had told me he kept for serious occasions. He had known we were coming. He had prepared accordingly. The helicopter door opened. I stepped out. I had chosen the kaftan carefully. Deep navy with a woven pattern that was visible only in direct light, the kind of garment that announces nothing and says everything. The watch on my wrist was the one from the magazine. Behind me, Chitty stepped down, then Ngozi, Graceland's CFO, a woman with the precise serenity of someone who manages significant sums with complete confidence, and then the 2 members of the Transcorp deal team. 5 people. All of them with a purpose. None of them performing. Chief Okonkwo Briggs met me at the edge of the landing pad with both hands extended, his face open in the wide, genuine smile of a man who has cultivated the ability to recognize serious people and is pleased when they arrive at his house. Emeka Grace, he said, gripping my hands. My son, you have arrived correctly. Chief, I said. Thank you for having us. From the driveway, roughly 40 meters away, Adiz watched this. I knew she was watching. I did not look at her. Not yet. I was in conversation with the chief, listening to what he was saying about the preparation he had made, the team he had assembled inside for our review session. I was present in that conversation fully and completely, which is the only way I know how to be in a conversation. As we turned to walk toward the main house, I saw my mother in the side doorway. I stopped. Chief, I said, 1 moment please. He followed my gaze. He saw the woman in the gray uniform standing straight in the doorway. Something moved across his face. Not recognition yet, just attention. He nodded. I crossed the compound alone. My mother watched me come. Her face was completely still, the way still water is still, not because nothing is there but because everything is settled. When I reached her I stopped and looked at her for a moment. Her pressed uniform. Her careful gray hair. The hands I had known my whole life, folded in front of her now. I took both her hands in mine. Mama, I said.
Come.
I want you to meet someone. She looked at my face the way she always did before agreeing to anything, a thorough, direct, affectionate assessment. "Emeka Jr.," she said. "Don't make this a performance." "It is not a performance," I said. "I promise."
She came.
We walked together across the compound, the son and his mother, the helicopter gleaming behind us, the Lagos evening light doing what it always does in that hour, turning everything golden and slightly unreal, toward Chief Okonkwo Briggs, who stood waiting and watched our approach with an expression that was computing something as we drew closer. "Chief Okonkwo Briggs," I said, "this is Grace Emeka, my mother. The woman Graceland Holdings is named after." The chief removed his cap. It was not a gesture he made casually. I had seen him in photographs with state governors, with ministers, with foreign investors. He wore his cap the way he wore his authority, as a settled fact, not something to be adjusted for visitors. He removed it now, and held it against his chest, and looked at my mother directly. "Mama Grace," he said, his voice low and formal, "you are very welcome to my house. Please come inside." My mother said, "Thank you, sir." In the 40 meters of driveway behind us, Adi's face had gone through several stages of rearrangement. I saw this in my peripheral vision. I did not turn to face her directly. The computation was happening in real time. The helicopter, the logo, the way the chief was behaving, the woman in the gray uniform being walked into the house as a guest, the man in the kaftan whose name she had just heard the chief say. "Emeka?" Her voice cut across the compound. It was trying to hold its usual register, the bright, social voice of a woman who knows people and moves through rooms, but something underneath it was not quite holding. "Hello, Adiz," I said. I looked at her directly then. 2 seconds. Long enough to let her see that I was entirely well, entirely present, entirely not what she had predicted I would be. Then I turned and walked into the house with my mother and the chief. Behind us, I heard no sound at all. Chief Okonkwo Briggs's study was the kind of room that tells you everything about the person who built it. Not the furniture. Furniture can be bought in an afternoon with someone else's taste. The room told you about its owner through what it showed willingly. Shelves of books with creased spines that had been read, not displayed. Photographs in plain frames of events and people that meant something rather than events, and people that looked impressive. A desk of African teak that had probably been in the family for 2 generations. A window overlooking the back garden that kept the room honest by showing you what was real outside it. We sat around the desk, the chief at his desk, Chidi and Ngozi and the Transcorp team ranged on the chairs, myself across from the chief, and in a chair that had been brought specifically and placed at a slight angle that included her without requiring her to perform participation, my mother. She drank her tea. She listened. She said very little. Occasionally the chief would glance at her when making a point about values or long-term thinking, and she would meet his gaze with the attention of someone who has been thinking about these things for much longer than the meeting has been going on. At one point, discussing Graceland's founding philosophy, the reason I had structured the equity the way I had, the reason I had insisted on certain provisions for employee ownership, the reason the platform's pricing was calibrated to serve small manufacturers rather than to maximize revenue from large ones. The chief stopped me mid-sentence. "Why?" he said. "Not how. I understand the how."
"Why?"
"What made you build it this way rather than the more immediately profitable way?" I thought about this for a moment. Then I said, "My mother." The room was quiet. "When I was a child," I said, "I watched my mother extend credit to a market woman in our neighborhood who owed her for 2 months' work. She never asked for it back. When I asked her why, she said, because she is working hard to pay it and she knows she owes it, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is trust them out loud." I paused. The small manufacturers on TrackChain, they're working hard. They know what they owe and what they are owed. The platform's job is to trust them out loud, to make the verification infrastructure so solid that trust becomes the rational choice for everyone in the chain. The chief looked at my mother. My mother was looking at her teacup with a small expression that, if you did not know her, might look like discomfort, but was actually the face she made when she was trying not to smile in a setting where smiling felt modest. "She raised you well," the chief said. "She raised me to be exactly what I needed to be," I said. The meeting went on. Details were examined, projections reviewed, provisions negotiated in the calm, methodical way of people who understand that the details are where respect lives. At 2 points, Chitty made adjustments to terms that I had expected to be challenged on, and were not. At 1 point, the chief's personal attorney arrived and joined the table, and the conversation became more formal for about 30 minutes before relaxing again. Outside the study, the afternoon in the Okonkwo-Briggs compound was taking a very different course. Tebena, the chief's nephew, Adi's boyfriend, had come home to find a scene he could not quite contextualize. He knew a deal team was in the house. He had been told by his uncle, briefly, that a significant partnership was being finalized. What he had not been told, and what he was now being told, in fragmented pieces, by Adi's, in the driveway, in a hushed and increasingly distressed voice, was the connection between the deal, the helicopter, the cleaning woman, and her. He listened to this account with the expression of a man trying to assemble a piece of furniture with instructions in a language he does not quite read. When Adi's finished, he said, "Wait, the Graceland man. He is your ex." We dated. It was nothing. And his mother. Tebena looked toward the house. His mother is the woman you... He stopped himself. He looked at Adi's for a long moment. Adi's, tell me exactly what happened with the cleaning woman. From the beginning. She told him. A version of it. The version that minimized and contextualized and deployed certain words like boundaries and professionalism, and these people have to understand their role in ways that, she evidently hoped, would organize the facts into a shape he could accept. He listened to the whole thing. Then he went inside the house and found Chitty in the sitting room, and they spoke quietly for about 45 minutes. I do not know exactly what Chitty said to him. Chitty has the gift of making truth arrive as information rather than as accusation, which means people receive it without raising their defenses, and by the time they understand what they have received, it is already inside them doing its work. Whatever he said, when Tebena emerged from that conversation, he was a quieter person than he had been when he went in. He walked past Adi's in the sitting room. He did not stop. He went upstairs. She called after him. He did not answer. The particular quality of that silence, the silence of a man who has seen something he cannot unsee, filled the sitting room in a way that Remy, who was still there, found uncomfortable enough to make her excuses to leave. Adi's sat alone in the sitting room of the house she had arranged herself in over 6 months, the cushions positioned as she liked, the art selected with her input, the flowers she had insisted on in the vases on the side tables, and for the first time in a very long time, sat in it as a guest. When the formal meeting concluded and the papers that needed initialing had been initialed, Chief Okonkwo-Briggs walked us to the landing pad with the ease of a man who has signed significant agreements before and knows that the most important part comes after. Not the paperwork, but the relationship. He and I walked a short distance behind the group. "Your mother," he said, "she has been in this house 3 months. Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I have been trying to understand how I did not know." "She would not have wanted you to know," I said. "She is not a person who asks for intervention." "No," he said. "I could see that." He paused. "She did not need it in the end." "No," I agreed.
He looked at me.
"You were not here for revenge. It was not a question. I was here for the business," I said. "And for my mother. And yes, to let something be seen that needed to be seen. But I did not come to destroy anything." He nodded slowly. "There is a difference," he said, "between a man who arrives to burn something down and a man who arrives to let the light in. The second kind is rarer. I think you're the second kind." He shook my hand again. The helicopter lifted. Lagos spread out below us. The islands, the lagoon, the impossible density of a city that contains everything and has room for everything and ultimately rewards the people who come to it with something real in their hands. That evening, after we left, Chief Okonkwo-Briggs called Adi's into his study. I know what happened in that conversation not because I was there, but because the chief told me parts of it himself, weeks later, and because Chidinma, a cousin of Chitty's who had been at the house that evening as a family guest and observed the aftermath, gave Chitty an account that Chitty gave me. The chief sat behind his teak desk. He looked at Adi's for a long moment without speaking. She was still composed on the surface. She had rebuilt her composure in the hours since the helicopter, reassembled it with the skill of someone who has been managing appearances for years, but the chief was not looking at the surface. "Tell me about Grace," he said. She said Grace had been a good worker, reliable, no complaints. "The woman you made remop the floor in front of your guests," the chief said. "Was she reliable then?" Silence. "The woman you accused of stealing olive oil." He said it plainly, without accusation in his voice, which made it land harder than accusation would have. In front of the other staff. She started to say something. "Adiz." The chief's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I have spent 42 years building something that I intend to pass on to people worth passing it to. Everything I have rests on one foundation, that the people who know me know that I treat every person with the dignity due to a human being, regardless of what that person can do for me. That is not sentiment. That is strategy. Because the way you treat the person who cannot benefit you is the truest possible information about your character. And character is what everything else is built on." He looked at her steadily. "I have been watching you in this house for 6 months. I have seen things that I told myself were not what they appeared to be because I wanted to give the benefit of the doubt to someone my nephew cares for. Today I understood what they appeared to be was exactly what they were." She began to cry. The chief was not unmoved by this. He also was not diverted. "You will apologize to Grace Emeka before she leaves this property," he said. "Not for my benefit. Not for Emeka's. For your own. Because the only way to begin correcting a mistake is to name it directly to the person you made it against." He stood, which signaled that the conversation was over. "Adiz," he said at the door. "You are an intelligent woman. I have seen that also. Intelligence without character is a very powerful car with no steering. It can travel very fast. But you cannot predict where it ends up." My mother was putting on her coat in the entrance hall. The same coat she had arrived in that morning, pressed and neat. The coat of a woman who maintained her standards regardless of circumstance, when Adiz found her. She came alone. That was something. She had sent Remy home, and she was not performing this for an audience. Whatever she had decided to do in the chief's study, she was doing it because it needed doing. She stood in the entrance hall for a moment before speaking. "Grace," she said. My mother turned. Her face was exactly what it always was. Open, direct, without pretense in either direction, neither cold nor manufactured warmth. Adiz looked at her. Really looked, in a way she perhaps had not allowed herself to in 3 months. Then she said, "I want to apologize for how I treated you. It was wrong." My mother listened to this. Then she said something that I will carry for the rest of my life, because my mother told me word for word on the drive home, and it is the kind of sentence that, once heard, cannot be unfound. She said, "I accept your apology, Adiz. I accept it fully, because carrying unforgiveness is a weight I have no use for, and because you are young enough that what you do next matters more than what you did before." She looked at her. "But I want you to hear something real. You are a genuinely intelligent woman. I have watched you work. I have listened to you think out loud. You have gifts, real ones, not performed ones. But you have been spending those gifts on the wrong thing. You have been using your intelligence to position yourself above people instead of alongside them. That is not intelligence. That is fear wearing intelligence's clothes." Adiz was crying properly now. Not the managed tears of earlier in the chief's study, real ones, the kind that come from somewhere specific. "The man my son is," my mother continued, "became that man not because the world was easy with him. This city was not easy with him. Money was not easy with him. Nothing was easy. He became that man because he decided who he was before any of that arrived. He decided what kind of person to be. And then he just kept being it. Through everything." She buttoned her coat. Second button, third button, fourth. "That is the only kind of person worth becoming," she said. "Whether you have money or whether you do not. Whether people see you or whether they don't. You decide, and then you hold to it. You have not decided yet. I think you know that. I think that is part of what has been driving the behavior, the not having decided, the trying to fill that gap with position and things, and the approval of people who don't actually know you." She picked up her handbag. "I wish you well," she said. "I genuinely do. That is not a polite phrase, I mean it. I hope you find your way to the person you are supposed to be. But that journey has nothing to do with Tabena, or this house, or what I think of you, or what anyone else thinks of you. It is between you and yourself. And only you can make it." She walked out. I was at the car. I had been waiting, giving them the space of it. When my mother came through the front gate, she walked directly to me, and I opened the door and she got in, and I walked around to the driver's side and got in. She looked straight ahead. "Drive," she said. I drove. We did not talk about Adiz. We talked about the bougainvillea. She had noticed it on the way out, the particular red of it in the evening light, the way it was climbing the gatepost. We talked about a pepper soup she was going to make with the stockfish she had been soaking. We argued, mildly and enjoyably, about whether she needed new shoes. She insisted she did not. I insisted she would be getting them whether or not she needed them. She pointed out that this was not how shoe procurement worked. I pointed out that this was how it worked in the current circumstances. Lagos moved around us. The traffic, the generators, the roadside commerce, the noise that is the permanent background music of the city, all of it exactly as it always was and always will be, entirely indifferent to the small human dramas occurring within it. It was the best conversation I had had in months. Consequences in real life do not arrive with music. They arrive quietly over weeks, in the form of small decisions and changed circumstances that accumulate into a new landscape. Tabena and Adiz lasted 6 more weeks after the afternoon of the helicopter. What ended it was not any single confrontation, but the kind of gradual separation that happens when a shared illusion loses its structural integrity. What Tabena had seen that afternoon, what Chitty had made legible to him in their 45-minute conversation, was not something that could be unlearned. He had seen who Adiz was at the edge of her comfort, in the moments when she felt fully in control and unobserved. And that person was not someone he was able to continue choosing. He moved his things out over a weekend. Methodically, without scenes. He was, for all his surface qualities, a man who had been raised by his uncle and had absorbed certain things from that upbringing. Adiz's departure from the house was less organized. She stayed for 2 weeks after Tabena left, during which the chief treated her correctly, not coldly, but with a specific courtesy reserved for people who are in a transition period and deserve the dignity of completing it with some privacy. She left, eventually, on a Tuesday morning in a car ordered by phone, her things stacked in the entrance hall where my mother had stood. 6 weeks after the afternoon, I received a message from a number I did not recognize. It read in full, "This is Adiz. I know you don't owe me anything, and I know this is strange to receive. But I have been thinking about what your mother said to me. A lot. About deciding who you are before anything else arrives. I don't know yet what that looks like for me. But I am trying to find out, which is something I haven't been able to say about myself for a long time. I am sorry, Emeka. Not for us. I think that ending was right for both of us even if I did it wrong. I am sorry for the way I valued you, and the way I didn't value your mother, and the way I didn't understand what I was looking at when I was looking at you. I was wrong. Seriously wrong." I read it twice. Then I wrote, "Thank you, Adiz. Genuinely. I hope you find what you're looking for." I meant every word. I blocked the number afterward, not from hostility, but from clarity. We were not people who needed to be in ongoing contact. She had sent what she needed to send, and I had received it and returned it. That was a complete thing. Completed things deserve to rest. 8 months after the afternoon of the helicopter, I moved my mother into her house. Not a rented apartment. A house. On a quiet street in Ikoyi, between 2 larger properties whose gardens overhang the wall, so that walking down the street you are under a canopy of leaves even in the dry season. The house is not large by the standards of that neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, a sitting room, a study that she has converted into something between a library and a sewing room, a kitchen that faces east, so the morning light comes in first. There is a garden at the back, longer than it is wide, with a mature pawpaw tree at the far end that was there before we arrived, and which my mother takes as a sign of something, though she will not specify what. A neighbor on the left keeps chickens. This was, when I showed her the house, the detail that decided it. She heard the chickens over the wall on the viewing visit, and her face changed in the specific way it changes when she finds something genuinely good, and I said we were taking it. She walked through every room on the day she moved in and touched things. Not possessively. She is not a possessive person. More the way you touch things when you are verifying that they are real. The windowsill in the bedroom. The kitchen counter. The frame of the back door. Her hands moving across surfaces the way they had moved, for decades, across other people's surfaces. In the garden she stopped for a long time. I stood next to her and did not say anything because my mother, when she is in the middle of something real, does not need commentary. After a while she said, "Your grandmother would have loved this garden." "I know," I said. "She always said the best revenge on a hard life was a garden with something growing in it." I laughed. She laughed too. It was a sentence from a woman who had been dead for 11 years, delivered in a garden in Ikoyi at the exact right moment, and it landed the way things land when they have been waiting a long time to arrive. Graceland Holdings, in the year following the Transcorp partnership finalization, expanded its operations into 3 new states and signed its first cross-border contract, a supply chain technology partnership with a Ghanaian distributor network that had been wrestling with the same problem on their side of the Togo Gap. We now have 64 full-time employees. I have provided equity stakes to the first 12 people who joined the company, in the form of a vesting structure that Chitty designed over 3 evenings at my kitchen table and which remains one of the things I am most proud of about how Graceland operates. 43 of our employees are under 35. 28 of them are women. The majority of them grew up in the kinds of circumstances that Lagos tends to treat as a ceiling, places without contacts, without connections, without the networks of familiarity that smooth the passage of the more already connected through professional doors. I have watched each of them, over the years, become the kind of person they decided to be rather than the kind of person their circumstances were willing to let them be. There is nothing in my professional life that I find more satisfying than this. I still drive myself to work 3 days a week. My car is a Toyota Land Cruiser V8, comfortable, practical, built for Lagos roads, not built to be looked at. It is not the most expensive car in the Graceland parking lot. This is a deliberate choice. I am the founder of this company. I can afford to not be the best resourced person in every room I enter, and I find that choosing to be so creates a specific kind of freedom in professional relationships that money, ironically, cannot buy. Son is now head of technology. He arrived at 24 with a degree and a brilliance for database architecture that I recognized in the first test I gave him and which he has expanded, in the years since, into a genuine expertise in distributed logistics systems. He is 30 now. He owns a piece of the company. He has recently begun mentoring 2 younger engineers from his old neighborhood in Ijora with the same patient, unassuming dedication he brought to his own early years with us. Funk is head of operations. She knows every client in our network by name. Not their company name, their personal name. She knows which distributors prefer morning calls and which prefer written follow-ups. She knows which manufacturers in Kano are running extended family businesses where you must speak to the family patriarch before the CEO considers herself authorized to agree to anything. This knowledge lives in her head and in her relationships, and it is, in the most practical possible sense, foundational to what we do. Chitty joined the board as general counsel 18 months after incorporation. He attends every meeting in person and every board retreat with the preparation of a man who takes his commitments at face value, which is to say, very seriously. He brought his formidable professional intelligence and his network to the company, and he has used both in ways that have protected and grown what we built. Ngozi, as CFO, has the particular gift of making complexity clarify when she presents it, so that board meetings, which in many companies are exercises in managed confusion, are at Graceland exercises in genuine decision-making, because everyone in the room understands the numbers and what they mean. The Transcorp partnership valued Graceland at 4.7 billion naira at the time of finalization. In the subsequent year, with the new contracts and the expanded client base, a revised valuation has been commissioned. I will not state the new number here. What I will say is that when Chitty called me with the preliminary figure from the independent assessors, he was silent for a moment before saying it, and Chitty is not generally a person who is made silent by numbers. She does not work in other people's houses anymore. She says this without drama, without triumph, without any inflection except the simple factual one she uses for all simple facts. It was what was needed then, and it is not what is needed now. She tends her garden in the early mornings before the heat comes. She has planted tomatoes along the east wall, the same variety her grandmother grew in the village, which she tracked down through a seed supplier in Enugu with a specific determination she brings to things that matter to her. She has a pepper plant that has become, through her attentions, a pepper tree, to the confused delight of the neighborhood children who pass on the wall to investigate it. She reads in the afternoons. Everything and anything, novels, history, whatever is available. She has developed a serious interest in old Nigerian cinema and can debate the evolution of Nollywood from its early analog period through its current moment with a specificity and confidence that I find both impressive and, when she deploys it at family dinners, slightly alarming in its depth. She goes to church on Sundays. She brings the priest's stew every third week, which she makes on the Saturday before. The priest, a quiet man from Edo State who is 35 years her junior, has told her that her stew has become the thing he most looks forward to in his weekly schedule. She received this information with the polite modesty she extends to all compliments while privately finding it entirely reasonable. She calls me every Tuesday and Thursday at precisely 7 in the evening. She does not check if it is a good time. It is always a good time. She called me at 7 on a Thursday 2 weeks after the Transcorp signing and asked me what I was eating for dinner, and when I told her, she said that was not enough and that she was sending me something with the driver in the morning, and the following morning a driver arrived with a cooler of food large enough to last me 4 days. This is what she considers an appropriate use of her time and resources. When I bring guests to the house, colleagues, board members, the occasional journalist who is asked to interview the company's founder and whom I have directed instead to meet my mother, which has resulted in 3 profiles of Graceland that are entirely different from any profile I could have given. She feeds them. She asks them questions. She listens to the answers with a focused, unhurried attention that is her most consistent characteristic across 63 years of life. 3 months ago, a young woman who works in our Lagos office, 26, from Abia State, extraordinary at her job, going through a difficult personal period, sat in my mother's garden for 4 hours on a Saturday afternoon and talked, and my mother listened, and I do not know what was said, but the young woman came to work the following Monday with something settled in her face that had not been there the Friday before. This is who Grace Emeka is. This is what she does with her time. This is, in the clearest possible language, why Graceland is named after her. I have been asked many times since the story of the helicopter afternoon became known in Lagos professional circles, and it became known because Lagos is a city that runs entirely on story, and no story involving a helicopter, a billionaire valuation, a cleaning woman, and a dramatic scene in a Lekki compound stays private for very long, whether I planned it as revenge. The honest answer is complicated, and I want to give it honestly. I plan to arrive. I planned to arrive at the right place and the right time as fully and completely myself as I had ever been, with the company I had built and the team I had assembled and my name carried on the side of a helicopter that I had not purchased but could afford to rent for an afternoon because of what I had built. I planned for my mother to be present. I planned for the truth of things, the real truth, not the performed version, to be visible to people who had not been able to see it before. Was that revenge? I have turned the word over many times. My grandmother had a different word. She called it consequence. She said that consequence was not something you visited on people, that was punishment, and punishment required you to be judge, and she was suspicious of anyone who appointed themselves judge, because in her experience the people most eager to judge were the people most in need of being judged themselves. Consequence was something else. Consequence was what arrived by itself, eventually, when the distance between what someone had been and what they had pretended to be had been fully covered. All I did was make sure I was present when it arrived. And make sure my mother was present when it arrived. Because my mother had been present for every version of the building, even the underground versions she couldn't see, and she deserved to be there for the arrival. There is a version of this story that people tell as a victory narrative. The village boy who became rich and humbled the woman who underestimated him. I understand why it gets told that way.
It is satisfying.
It fits a shape. But that is not the story as I lived it. The story as I lived it is about my mother standing in the entrance hall of a large house in Lekki, in her pressed gray uniform, buttoning her coat button by button, and saying to a crying woman, You are young enough that what you do next matters more than what you did before. That is the story. That is the whole story. Everything else, the helicopter, the valuation, the chief removing his cap, those are supporting details. The center of it is a 63-year-old woman who had been treated as subhuman, who had been made to kneel by someone who mistook cruelty for power and who responded not with bitterness or performance, but with the same steady, dignified generosity she had brought to every room of her life. She never lost herself. Through all of it, the early years, the hard years, the Lagos years, the 3 months in that Lekki house, she never once became less than who she was. That is what I was trying to honor when I named the company after her. Not her suffering, her character. Adiz was wrong about many things, but she was wrong about one thing most of all. She thought the measure of a life was what you accumulated, and she thought the measure of a person was what they displayed. She had it inverted. The measure of a life is what you build, and the measure of a person is who they remain when no one is watching and nothing is easy. My mother has been both of those things for 63 years. I have been trying to become them for 41. My grandmother used to say, "The tree that survives the harmattan is not the one with the most branches. It is the one with the deepest roots." Build your roots. Then let the harmattan come. It will come anyway. If this story moves something in you, if Grace Emeka's quiet, unbreakable dignity reached you, then share it. Send it to someone who is building in the dark right now and needs to know that the building is not invisible just because no one can see it yet. Send it to someone who has been dismissed and has not yet found the language for what they know about themselves. Like this video. Subscribe to African Folktales Studio. Tomorrow's story is already waiting for you, and it is the kind of story that changes how you see something you thought you already understood. Drop in the comments, what moment in this story hit you the hardest? Was it my mother in the hallway? Was it the helicopter? Was it the sentence she said in the entrance hall to Adiz?
Tell me.
I read every comment. Go well.